The alarm never wakes me anymore. After 64 years, your body just knows. It knows the exact moment the sky shifts from black to that deep bruised blue, the color that comes maybe 20 minutes before the first real light, when the mockingbirds start their arguments in the sycamore out front and the whole neighborhood is still quiet enough that you can hear your own heartbeat. I pulled back the curtain above my bed, the curtain with the small magnolia print that I had chosen myself at the fabric store on Whitaker Street back in 1997, the one I had hemmed by hand because the window was an odd size and nothing off the shelf ever fit right. Outside, Savannah was doing what Savannah does best in early summer, breathing. Long, slow, humid breaths that made the Spanish moss along the street hang heavy and still, like the whole city was resting before the heat arrived. I turned to the nightstand. Harold smiled back at me from the silver frame. He was standing in front of this house, our house, the day we signed the papers in 1989. He had on his good blue shirt, the one with the small white buttons I always had to replace because he was rough on buttons. He was holding a hammer, even though there was nothing to hammer that particular day. He just wanted to hold it. A man ought to have a tool in his hand when he takes possession of something he worked for, he had said. The photographer, actually just our neighbor Nadia with a disposable camera, had caught him mid-laugh, head thrown back, eyes crinkled shut. That was Harold. He laughed like he meant it. "Good morning, baby," I said to him, the way I had said it every morning for 5 years since the stroke took him in the spring of 2019. I put my feet on the floor, felt the cool of the hardwood, and stood. The kitchen smells different from every other room in this house, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. It smells like 35 years of Sunday mornings, like the pound cake I made the week Denise passed her bar exam, and the red beans and rice that simmered all day every Mardi Gras, because Harold had grown up in a household that observed Mardi Gras with food, even though we were nowhere near Louisiana. It smells like burned toast and strong coffee, and the particular sweetness of a cast-iron skillet that has been seasoned so many times it has become something else entirely. Not just a pan, but a record. I started the coffee in the machine Harold bought at a yard sale in 1994. It was old even then. I had replaced the carafe twice and the heating element once, and every repairman who had ever seen it told me I should just buy a new one, and every time I said the same thing, "It still works." While the coffee brewed, I opened my small notebook. The blue one with the soft cover, the one I started the week after Harold's funeral when my grief counselor told me that writing down 3 things I was grateful for each morning had helped her own mother through a very dark time. I do not always feel like doing it, but I always do it. That morning I wrote, the roof over my head, strong coffee, the sound of Imani's voice on the phone last night, my granddaughter, 14 years old and already more herself than most people manage to become in a lifetime. She had called to tell me about a piece she had been learning on the piano, a simplified arrangement of an old Coltrane melody that her school music teacher had introduced her to. She played a few bars over the phone, badly but joyfully, and I sat at this very table and felt something in my chest open up like a window. That girl, I thought, pouring my coffee. She is going to be something. People drive through the Victorian district of Savannah, and they see the architecture. They see the wraparound porches and the tall, narrow windows and the decorative woodwork along the eaves. And they take photographs, and they talk about charm and character, the way people talk about things they appreciate without fully understanding. I do not see the architecture anymore. I see the years. I see the summer of 1991 when Harold and Reggie was 2 years old and thought he was helping, planted the live oak tree in the front yard. That tree is taller than the roofline now. I see the winter of 1998 when a pipe burst in the upstairs bathroom, and Harold and I spent 3 days with towels and buckets and a borrowed shop vac while Denise, 12 years old and already very opinionated, supervised from the doorway. I see the long afternoons on the front porch where I taught piano lessons to the neighborhood children. 30 years of them, wave after wave, some who went on to study music seriously, and many more who simply needed somewhere to be after school where someone paid attention to them. We bought this house sagging and gray. The previous owner, Mrs. Ruth Ellen Pritchard, was 81 years old and moving to live with her daughter in Macon. She shook our hands at the closing and said, "You take care of her." She meant the house. Harold said, "Yes, ma'am, we will." And we did. We stripped the paint and found good bones underneath. We replaced the rotting porch boards one at a time. We refinished the floors ourselves over 3 weekends, Harold on his knees with the sander, me following behind with the stain, both of us laughing and arguing and listening to the radio. Our neighbor Nadia brought over sandwiches both days and sat on the porch steps watching us work like we were her personal entertainment. The deed had been in my name alone since Harold's estate cleared probate. His will was clear. The trust he had established in 2015 even clearer. Harold was a methodical man. He believed in doing things properly the first time, so you did not have to redo them later. He applied that principle to electrical work and to legal documents with equal conviction. I never worried about the house. I probably should have been paying closer attention. My daughter Denise is what people in Savannah call accomplished. Law degree from Emory, her own firm in Buckhead, a condominium in a building with a doorman and a rooftop terrace. She wears blazers that cost more than my first car, and she carries herself with the particular confidence of someone who has fought hard to get somewhere and intends to make sure everyone can see she arrived. I am proud of her. I want to say that clearly because everything that comes after this is complicated, and complicated things can get misread if you do not lay the foundation right. I am proud of Denise. I watched her study until 2 in the morning for the LSAT while working 20 hours a week at the mall. I watched her cry exactly once after her first-year law school grades came back, and then never cry about it again. I watched her build something from nothing, the way Harold and I had built something from nothing, and I recognized the pattern of it, the stubbornness, the refusal to quit, the particular pride of a person who has earned every single thing they have. But somewhere along the way, and I could not have told you exactly when, Denise stopped being fully present when she came home. She started assessing. She would stand in the doorway of the kitchen, and her eyes would move around the room in a way that was not quite looking, more like cataloging. She started saying things like, "Mama, do you know what houses on this block are selling for right now?" She started asking about my finances in ways that felt like interviews. Once, about 8 months after Harold passed, she stood in the front hallway and said apropos of nothing, "This place is really too much for one person to manage." I told her I managed just fine. Her husband Troy said even less, but observed even more. Troy Crawford was a real estate broker who had made a considerable amount of money during Atlanta's development boom, and he had the habit of real estate brokers everywhere, which is to look at a space and see not what it is, but what it could be worth. Every time he visited, he moved through the rooms with a slow, deliberate attention that had nothing to do with admiring the craftsmanship and everything to do with calculating the square footage. I did not like Troy. I had never fully liked Troy. Harold had liked him even less, and had been considerably less discreet about it. Still, family is family. You work with what you have. The first time Denise mentioned Magnolia Estates, I thought she was just making conversation. It was a Sunday in April, and we were sitting on the porch after dinner, and she said, "A woman I know from the firm just moved her mother into Magnolia Estates over on Habersham. She says it's beautiful. Pool, yoga classes, chef-prepared meals." "That's nice for her mother," I said. "I'm just saying, Mama, you're 64. It might be worth touring the place. Just to see." "I'm 64, not 94. I have a perfectly good kitchen." She smiled and let it drop. We talked about Imani's school play and the weather, and whether Harold's old truck in the garage was ever going to be dealt with. And by the time she drove back to Atlanta, I had more or less forgotten the conversation. 3 weeks later, Troy mentioned, casually, that he had a colleague who specialized in estate transitions and would be happy to help organize the paperwork situation. "What paperwork situation?" I asked. "Oh, you know, deeds, trusts, that sort of thing. It can get complicated for a single person managing a property alone." "My paperwork is fine, Troy," I said. Harold made sure of that before he died. Troy nodded and smiled, and I noticed that his smile never quite reached his eyes, and I filed that observation away in the part of my mind where I keep things I do not fully trust yet. I also thought about my son Reggie, 35 years old, living in Memphis, working in construction management. He called on Harold's birthday, and at Christmas, conversations that were warm but brief, the kind that happen between people who love each other but have let too much distance accumulate without knowing quite how to close it. Harold had always been the bridge between Reggie and me, the one who picked up the phone, who remembered to pass along news, who kept the threads connected. Without him, we had both gone quieter than we should have. Still, I knew this about Reggie. He was his father's son in the ways that mattered most. He would not have gone along with something dishonest. Of that I was certain, even across the distance. About 2 months after Troy's mention of the estate colleague, my phone lit up with Denise's name on a Thursday evening, and everything changed. I was at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea and a student's practice sheet. Young Marcus Jr., 7 years old and enormously proud of his ability to find middle C. I was marking the sheet in pencil, noting where he needed to slow down in the second measure. Denise called and we talked for maybe 15 minutes. She asked how I was feeling. I told her good. She asked if I had had my blood pressure checked recently. I told her yes, it was fine. She asked about Imani, and I told her Imani had called the night before and played me something on the piano, and Denise laughed and said, "That girl, I swear." We said goodnight. She said, "Love you, Mama." I said it back. I placed the phone on the table next to my tea, and then I heard her voice again, not through a new call, through the phone that was still connected, the call that had not ended, that she had not checked before she set her own phone down on a hard surface somewhere in her Atlanta condo. Her voice was maybe 20% quieter than it had been when she was talking to me, but the kitchen was silent, and I have always had good ears. "Troy, I just talked to her. She doesn't suspect anything." I went very still. Troy's voice, further from the microphone. "Good. I heard back from Pemberton today. They want the Savannah property badly. Location, square footage, historic designation. They're talking 1.1, possibly 1.3 if we move fast." "She won't sell," Denise said. "I've tried." "She doesn't have to agree to sell. That's the whole point." A pause, the sound of something being set down, glass on a hard surface. "Georgia conservatorship statute. You petition on grounds that she can no longer manage her own affairs. We get Dr. Morrison to sign off on a cognitive evaluation. I already had a preliminary conversation with him." My hand was resting flat on Marcus Jr.'s practice sheet. I looked at it. It was not shaking. "Once the court appoints you as conservator," Troy continued, "you have authority over her financial decisions, including the house. We list it, we sell it, she's at Magnolia Estates before the year is out." "And the trust?" Denise asked. "That's what the lawyer is for. There are ways to challenge a trust if you have conservatorship. It's not simple, but it's not impossible." A silence. Then Denise, quieter. "What about Reggie? He's not going to go along with this." "Reggie isn't a factor. He's in Memphis. He barely calls her. He doesn't have standing to contest if we move quickly. And Imani is 14 years old," Troy said, and there was something in his voice when he said it. A flatness, a dismissiveness, that I felt like cold water across the back of my neck. "She'll adjust." I sat at my kitchen table. The chamomile tea had gone cold. The pencil was still in my hand. Marcus Jr.'s practice sheet was still in front of me, with my neat little marks showing him where to slow down. Outside, the mockingbirds were still going. The live oak Harold planted 33 years ago made its quiet sound in the evening breeze, that particular whisper of old leaves that I had heard so many thousands of times that I no longer heard it consciously, the way you stop hearing the sound of your own breathing. I heard it now. I placed the pencil down. I stood up. I walked to the window above the sink and looked out at the backyard, at the garden Harold had built along the fence where his roses were coming in for the season. Red and pink and one stubborn yellow one that had never bloomed when it was supposed to, but always eventually bloomed anyway. Then I walked to the living room and looked at Harold's photograph on the mantel. He was laughing, hammer in hand, standing in front of this house on the day we made it ours. "Harold," I said quietly, "your daughter is planning to sell our home." He kept laughing, frozen in his good blue shirt, his eyes crinkled with a joy that nothing had ever been able to touch. I stood there for a long time, and then I went to the kitchen, poured the cold tea down the drain, and began to think. That night, sleep was not possible. I have heard people describe betrayal as a sharp thing, a knife, a slap, a sudden break. But that is not how it felt. It felt more like sitting in a room and realizing slowly that the walls had been moving inward for a long time, so gradually that you had adapted without noticing, and now that you had finally seen it, you could not unsee it. I lay in the dark and went back through the months. The first mention of Magnolia Estates, the questions about the paperwork, Troy's colleague who specialized in estate transitions, the question about my blood pressure, the question about my doctor, Denise asking for doctor, Morrison's phone number 6 months ago. "Just for emergencies, Mama, in case we can't reach you." I had given it to her without hesitation. The live oak moved outside my window, and I thought about Harold planting it with 2-year-old Reggie toddling around his feet, getting into the dirt, being more hindrance than help, and loving every second of it. I thought about Harold's hands. Wide, careful, competent hands, placing that young tree into the ground with the same attention he gave every task he undertook. Roots don't fear the wind, he used to say. It was something his own father had told him, a man who had grown up in Georgia when Georgia was a very different and more dangerous place, a man who had held on to what was his through sheer, quiet, unbroken will. Roots don't fear the wind. I said it out loud, once in the dark. Then I got up, went to the kitchen, made tea, properly this time, boiling water, the right amount of steeping, and sat down at the table with the blue tin box Harold kept under the bed. He had organized everything in it the way he organized everything, methodically, labeled, nothing left to chance. The house deed, the trust documents, insurance papers, his will, and at the very bottom, a plain white envelope sealed with 3 words written on the front in Harold's careful printing. Loretta, when needed. I had looked at that envelope many times in 5 years. I had never opened it. I turned it over in my hands. I placed it on the table in front of me. The kitchen was quiet except for the refrigerator's low hum and the sound of the street outside, a car passing slow, someone's radio fading into the distance. I did not open it that night, but I put it in the pocket of my housecoat, and I sat with my tea until the sky started turning that deep bruised blue again, and when the mockingbird started up in the sycamore, I had the beginning of a plan. Not a plan born from anger. Anger is useful for about 10 minutes and then it starts burning the wrong things. This was something steadier than anger. Harold used to say that the most dangerous thing in the world was a quiet person who had made up their mind. Loretta Mae Washington, I thought. Make up your mind. I already had. Friday morning I was sitting across from Dorothy Simmons before the first tourist buses had made their way down Broughton Street. Sweet Magnolia Bakery opens at 6:30, and Dot and I had been at our corner table, the one by the window with the slightly uneven leg that the owner Bobby had never fixed in 22 years. Every Friday morning for longer than some of my piano students had been alive. We had sat at that table through the death of both our husbands, through Denise's wedding and Reggie's divorce and Amani's birth, through 2 hurricanes that came close enough to board the windows and one that changed the whole shape of the coastline 2 counties south of us. That table had heard a great deal. Dot was already there when I arrived, 2 coffees waiting, her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead the way she always wore them when she was not actually reading, like a spare set of eyes she kept in reserve. She took one look at my face and said nothing, just pushed my cup toward me and waited. That is the thing about a friendship of 40 years. The other person learns to read you the way you read a piece of music you have played so many times that you do not look at the notes anymore. You just know what is coming, what it needs, where to be quiet, and where to press forward. I told her everything. I told it the same way I had run it through my mind the night before. In order, without drama, just the facts laid out like items on a list. The phone call, Troy's voice, the number. 1.1 million, possibly 1.3. Magnolia Estates, Dr. Morrison, conservatorship. Dot listened with her hands around her coffee cup, not moving. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Is the deed still clean?" "My name, only my name. Has been since Harold's estate cleared probate." "The trust?" "Harold set it up in 2015. Vivian Holt handled it." Dot nodded once, the slow, deliberate nod of a woman who had spent 30 years as the chief accountant for Chatham County and had seen every variety of human financial misbehavior imaginable. She placed her cup down. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "Then here is what you do," she said. "First thing this morning, before you do anything else, you call Vivian Holt. Not next week. This morning. Already planning on it. Good. Second thing. And I need you to hear this clearly, Loretta, because I know you and I know your instincts. You do not call Denise. You do not let on that you heard a single word. Not yet." I looked at her. "I know," she said. "It goes against every natural impulse. But the second she knows you know, they will move faster. Right now you have something better than anger. You have time, and they do not know it." I thought about the quiet person who had made up her mind. "I already decided that last night," I said. Dot picked up her coffee again, and something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, more like a settling, a quiet satisfaction. "Then you are already ahead of them," she said. "Now eat your biscuit. You need to think on a full stomach. Vivian Holt's office was on the third floor of a red brick building on Bull Street, the kind of building that Savannah does so well, old enough to have stories in the walls, maintained well enough that you feel the competence of the people inside before you have even spoken to them. I had been in this office once before with Harold in the summer of 2015, when we sat across from Vivian and worked through every detail of the trust he wanted to establish. Harold had come with a legal pad covered in his careful printing, questions, clarifications, contingencies he had thought through at the kitchen table over several evenings. Vivian had been patient with every one of them. Afterward, Harold had shaken her hand and said, "You're good at this because you actually listen." She had said, "Mr. Washington, that's the whole job." She stood when I walked in, and I could see in the slight adjustment of her expression, nothing dramatic, just a professional's quick read of a client's energy, that she understood this was not a routine visit. "Loretta," she said, "sit down. Tell me what's happening." I told her. She listened the way she always listened, completely, without interrupting, her pen still on the desk in front of her. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "They are planning to use Georgia's conservatorship statute, a legal process that allows a family member to petition the court to take over someone's financial decisions on the grounds that the person can no longer manage their own affairs." Troy mentioned it specifically. He said he had already spoken with my doctor. Vivian's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes sharpened. "Dr. Morrison?" "Yes." She reached for her legal pad. "Here is where you stand. The good news first. The deed is clean. The house is entirely yours, and no transaction can occur without your signature. Nobody can sell that property without your consent. And the bad news. A conservatorship petition, if filed with supporting medical documentation, can result in a temporary freeze on your ability to make financial decisions independently while the court conducts its review. That process typically takes 60 to 90 days. In that window, if they have done their groundwork, they can create enough legal complexity to make your life very difficult, even if the petition ultimately fails." I sat with that for a moment. So they do not need to win. They just need to slow me down. That is the strategy, yes. She tapped her pen against the pad. But here is what they do not know. We can take that window away from them entirely, and we are going to do it with 3 moves, all at the same time. She laid it out clearly, the way Harold used to lay out a wiring diagram. Every connection shown, every junction labeled, nothing left to assumption. The first move, transfer the house into a revocable living trust in my name alone, a legal structure that would keep the property fully under my control while protecting it from a conservatorship proceeding in ways that a simple personal deed did not. Vivian said she could have the paperwork drafted within 48 hours and recorded at the courthouse by the end of the following week. The second move, execute a durable power of attorney, a document naming the person who would make decisions on my behalf if I was ever genuinely unable to make them myself, and name Dorothy Simmons in that role, not Denise, not anyone in my family. A person of my own choosing, with no financial interest in my estate. If they file a conservatorship petition and the court sees that you already have a valid, properly executed power of attorney naming a trusted representative, Vivian said, the argument for court-appointed conservatorship becomes significantly harder to make. The third move, proactive medical documentation. I want you to make an appointment this week with a neuropsychologist completely independent of Dr. Morrison, someone with no prior relationship with your family. A full cognitive evaluation, memory, processing speed, executive function, the works. To prove I am competent. To create an official medical record showing your cognitive status, established before they file anything. If they walk into a Georgia courtroom with Dr. Morrison's signature suggesting diminished capacity, I want to walk in with a comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation showing a 64-year-old woman in full command of her faculties. She paused. It also removes Morrison entirely. You are going to change your primary care physician this week, and you are going to notify Morrison's office in writing that no records, no documentation, and no verbal communications about your health are to be released to any party without a written authorization bearing your current signature. I looked at her across the desk. She looked back at me with the steady calm of a woman who had spent her career standing between people and the worst things other people try to do to them. "Vivian," I said, "Harold told me once that you were good at this because you actually listen. He was a perceptive man." "He was." I reached into my bag and took out the blue tin box. I opened it on her desk and found at the bottom the white envelope with Harold's careful printing on the front. He left me this. I have not opened it yet. She looked at the envelope and something crossed her face. Not surprise, more like recognition. Harold came to see me in March of 2018, she said quietly. He asked me some questions about life insurance policies and asset protection. He was very specific about what he wanted and very clear that he did not want you to know until you were ready. My hands were steady on the envelope. He knew something was coming. He knew enough to prepare. She paused. Open it, Loretta. Harold's handwriting was the same as it always was. Careful, even. The letters slightly tilted to the right the way they had been since the 3rd grade, when his teacher had tried to correct his natural lean, and he had simply incorporated the correction imperfectly and carried the result for the rest of his life. Loretta, my love, if you're reading this, you needed to. I'm glad I thought ahead. In 2018, I took out a separate life insurance policy through Coastal Mutual. The information is in the small envelope inside this one. I didn't add it to our joint accounts or mention it to the children. The amount is $340,000. It is yours entirely, with no strings and no conditions. I want you to have money that is completely your own. Not our money, not family money. Yours, so that you never have to ask anyone for anything, and no one can ever make you feel like a burden or a responsibility. I watched our daughter becoming someone I didn't entirely recognize. I don't think she's a bad person. I think she married a man who sees everything as a transaction, and I think she's been listening to him for long enough that she's starting to see things the same way. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But I wanted you protected, just in case. Vivian knows about the policy. She'll help you access it. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You just don't always believe that about yourself. Believe it now. All my love, always. Harold, I do not cry easily. I never have. Harold used to say I was the only person he had ever met who could be moved all the way to the bone without letting it show on the surface. He meant it as a compliment. I sat in Vivian Holt's office on Bull Street, and I read Harold's letter twice, and I did not cry, but I felt something shift in my chest, something that had been held at a careful, controlled angle for 5 years since that spring morning when the hospital called, and now it moved and settled differently, and I understood that I had been carrying it wrong for a long time. He had known. Not everything, not the specific shape of what was coming, but enough. He had loved me with enough foresight to build a wall I did not know I had. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You just don't always believe that about yourself. $340,000, I sadly said, not because I needed to say the number, but because saying it made it real. Deposited in a Coastal Mutual policy that matured in full upon his death, Vivian said. It has been sitting in a holding account waiting for you to find it, with 5 years of interest. I put the letter back in the envelope. I put the envelope in my bag. Let's get started, I said. The next 3 weeks move the way important things move when you have decided to be deliberate. Not fast, not slow, but with the particular momentum of a person who has stopped reacting and started choosing. I met with Dr. Patricia Osei at Savannah Neurology Associates on a Tuesday afternoon. Her office was calm and unhurried, and she explained the evaluation process with patience and clarity. We spent nearly 3 hours together across 2 appointments: memory assessments, processing exercises, executive function evaluations, the full measure of a mind in its current state. When she called with the results, she said, "Mrs. Washington, your cognitive profile is that of a healthy, high-functioning adult. There is no indication of any impairment in any area. I will have the written report to your attorney by Friday." "Thank you, Dr. Osei. Can I ask, is someone questioning your capacity?" "Someone is planning to," I said. "They just do not know yet that I have already answered the question." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Good for you." I changed my primary care doctor to Dr. James Whitfield, whose practice on Drayton Street had been recommended by Reverend Calvin Okafor. Our family's pastor and one of the most steadfastly decent men I had known in 40 years of Savannah life. I sent the certified letter to Dr. Morrison's office the same day the trust paperwork was filed. I was courteous in the letter. I was also precise. No records, no verbal communications, no exceptions without written authorization bearing my current signature and dated within the past 30 days. The living trust paperwork was recorded at the Chatham County Courthouse on a Wednesday. Dot signed the power of attorney documents before a notary on a Thursday. Reverend Calvin arrived at Vivian's office that same afternoon in his good suit, hat in hand, asking quietly if there was anything useful he could do. He signed his name as an independent witness to both documents without hesitation. In Savannah, Reverend Calvin's name on a piece of paper carries the weight of a man who has spent 40 years being trustworthy in public, and no one who knew him could suggest he had anything to gain from any of this. Harold would have appreciated this, Calvin, I told him afterward on the steps of Vivian's building. Harold Washington was my friend for 30 years, he said simply. This is the least I could do. I opened a new checking and savings account at Coastal Heritage Bank, not the bank where Denise occasionally transferred birthday money into a small joint account we shared. A new account, in my name alone, at an institution with no prior connection to my family. I transferred Harold's insurance funds there, along with my personal savings. Dot knew about it. Nobody else did. And through all of it, I called Denise every Sunday evening. I asked about her week. I asked about Imani. I told her about my piano students and the roses coming in along the back fence, and the fact that the sycamore out front had lost a big branch in a storm, and I had the tree service come out to look at it. I baked her favorite pound cake and shipped it to Atlanta for no particular reason. I was, by every surface measure, exactly the same woman I had always been. I was also at the same time building a wall brick by careful brick. It was Imani who called me on a Sunday night, not from her regular phone, but from the old tablet she kept under her mattress, the one her parents had forgotten she still had. Her face on the screen was serious, in the way that 14-year-old faces are serious when they have been carrying something too heavy for too long and have finally decided to put it down. "Grandma," she said, "I need to tell you something, but I'm scared." "Then take your time, baby," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." She had been in this back seat of Troy's car the previous Sunday, earbuds in, and Troy had assumed she was listening to music. She was not. The earbuds were out, tucked into her jacket pocket, and she had heard her father on the phone with someone, a lawyer, she thought, talking about a document that was almost ready to file. He said, "Once the petition is in, her options get very limited very fast." He said, "Morrison's office is being cooperative." He said, "Denise just needs to hold steady for another few weeks." Imani did not understand every word, but she understood enough. "Daddy was talking about you," she said, "about the house, about making it so you can't. He said something about you not being able to make decisions." "I know, sweetheart," I said. She blinked. "You know?" "I have known for a while. I have been taking care of it." The relief on her face was something I will not easily forget. The particular relief of a child who has been holding a secret that felt too large for one person and is now allowed to put it down. "The piano," she said suddenly. "Grandma, what's going to happen to your piano?" I looked across the room at the upright Steinway that had been in this house since 1993, that I had played every day for more than 30 years, that had been the instrument on which I had taught Imani her first scales when she was 7 years old, both of us on the bench together, her small hands finding the keys one at a time. "That piano," I said carefully, "is going to be exactly where it is right now for a very long time. I promise you that." She nodded, eyes bright. "And Imani, I need you to do one thing for me. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Live completely normally. Do not change anything. Do not let your parents know you talked to me. Can you do that?" "Yes," she said again, more firmly. "Grandma, I can do that." "I know you can." I paused. "You are more like your grandfather than you know." She smiled at that, a real smile, wide and sudden. "Is that good?" "Baby," I said, "that is the best thing I know how to say about a person." It was Vivian who told me not to sell the house. I had been considering it, the clean, decisive move that felt satisfying to think about. Sell it before they can take it, pull the asset out from under the plan, leave them with nothing to reach for. Part of me wanted to do it simply for the completeness of the gesture. Vivian sat across from me at her desk and said, "Don't." "Why not?" "Because an unexpected sale of a major asset by an older woman living alone, even a completely legal, completely voluntary sale, can be reframed. Troy is a real estate broker. Denise is a lawyer. They will argue that you acted under psychological distress, that the decision was not rational, that it is itself evidence of the very impaired judgment they are claiming to be concerned about. She folded her hands on the desk. If you sell the house, you hand them a story. If you keep the house and defeat them in court, you give them nothing. I looked at her. You want me to let them file the petition? I want them to walk into that courtroom with their best hand, she said, and I want to be sitting there with the cards they do not know you are holding. A clean neuropsychological evaluation, a properly structured living trust, a durable power of attorney naming a third party, an independent witness of community standing, and Harold's insurance policy, which means you have money in a private account that has nothing to do with any asset they think they are going to control. She paused. They have prepared a trap. We are going to let them walk into it. I thought about Harold's roses along the back fence, the live oak he had planted with Reggie in 1991, the piano where Imani had learned her first scales. A quiet person who has made up her mind, I said softly. I beg your pardon? Something Harold used to say. I straightened in my chair. Tell me what we do next. The call I had been waiting for came on a Monday morning, 3 weeks later. I was in the front room marking another student's practice sheet when the phone rang. Denise. Her voice was warm, careful, prepared in the way you can hear when someone has rehearsed what they are going to say. Mama, Troy and I have been talking, and we think it's time to have a real conversation about some things. About your situation, about the house, and about... We're just worried about you, living alone, and we want to make sure you're protected. I placed my pencil down. I think that is a fine idea, I said. Come Sunday. Just you, Denise. Leave Troy at home. A pause. Mama, Troy is part of this conversation. Then there will not be a conversation, I said. Not yet. I want to talk to my daughter, not my son-in-law, not anyone's lawyer. Just you and me on the porch, the way we used to. Another pause, longer this time. Okay, Mama, she said finally. Sunday. I put the phone down and looked out the window at the live oak. Its roots went down deeper than anyone who had not planted it could know. Hold on a little longer, I thought. Whether to the tree or to myself or to the house or to Harold, I was not entirely sure. It is almost time. Sunday arrived quietly, without drama, the way significant days sometimes do, as if the world had not gotten word of what was going to happen inside it. I was up before the mockingbirds. I made coffee, wrote in my blue notebook, watered the roses along the back fence. I put on the pale yellow dress I had bought the summer before Harold passed, the one he had said made me look like early morning, which was the most Harold thing he ever said to me, and also somehow exactly right. I had pressed it the night before and hung it on the back of the bedroom door so it would be ready. I was not nervous. That surprised me a little. I had thought I would be. But I had spent the past several weeks doing the quiet, careful work of a person who has stopped waiting to be saved and started saving herself. And on the other side of that work, there was something that felt less like nervousness and more like the particular stillness that comes before you play a piece of music you have practiced until it lives in your hands. Not the absence of feeling, but the presence of readiness. Dot's car was parked 2 houses down by 9 o'clock. She had offered to come to the door. I told her to stay in the car unless I called. I need to do this part myself, I said. She had nodded. No argument, no wounded feelings, just the clean understanding of a woman who has known me long enough to trust my judgment about what I need. Reverend Calvin had mentioned the previous Wednesday that he might find himself in the neighborhood on Sunday morning. I had not asked him to be. That was simply the kind of man he was. The front porch was swept. The hanging fern was watered. I placed 2 glasses of sweet tea on the small table between the chairs, the way I always had when Denise and I sat out here together, back when she would drive up from Atlanta and we would spend an afternoon not doing anything particular, just being in the same place at the same time, which is something I had come to understand is not as small a thing as it sounds. I sat down in my chair and waited. She came alone, as I had asked. I heard the car before I saw it. A rental, not her BMW, which meant she had flown in rather than driven, which meant she had decided this conversation was important enough to make a real trip of it. That told me something. She came up the front walk in dark slacks and a cream blouse, no blazer, hair pulled back simply. She looked younger without the full Atlanta armor on. She looked in a way that caught me somewhere tender, like the girl who used to come down these same front steps to catch the school bus, backpack swinging, always slightly late, always confident she would make it anyway. She always did make it. That was always true about Denise. "Mama," she said when she reached the porch. "Sit down, baby," I said. "There's tea." She sat. She picked up the glass, held it without drinking, looked out at the street. The live oak threw its wide shadow across the front yard. Somewhere down the block, someone was mowing a lawn, and the smell of cut grass drifted over on the warm morning air. "Mama," Denise started, "I came because I think it's time to be honest with each other." "I think so too," I said. She looked at me then, a searching look, trying to read something in my face. Whatever she was looking for, I am not sure she found it. I kept my expression where I wanted it. Open, present, entirely calm. "We filed the petition," she said. "Thursday. It's been submitted to Chatham County Superior Court." "I know," I said. "Vivian Holt's office was notified Friday morning." Something shifted in Denise's face. "You already have an attorney." "I have had Vivian since your father and I set up the trust in 2015. "I didn't know." "There is quite a bit you did not know," I said, and I kept my voice gentle when I said it, because gentleness was what the moment required. Not softness. There is a difference. Gentleness is the choice to be precise without being cruel. "I would like to tell you some of it now, if that is all right." She placed her glass down, nodded. I told her about the night the phone did not hang up. I told her about sitting at the kitchen table with Marcus Jr., his practice sheet and Harold's photograph and the cold chamomile tea, listening to her voice and Troy's voice laying out the plan they had built, without her ever once considering what it would mean to me as a person. Not as a property, not as a liability, not as a line item in a financial projection. As a person. Denise went very still. The color in her face changed. "I heard all of it," I said. 1.1 million, possibly 1.3. Magnolia Estates, Dr. Morrison. Conservatorship as a mechanism, not a protection. The cabin in Blue Ridge. I paused. "Troy said you would be settled before the year was out. That I would not remember what had happened." The sound she made was not quite a word. It was the sound of something giving way. "And Imani," I said. "He said she would adjust. She is 14 years old, and he said she would adjust, as if the relationship between a child and her grandmother is just another inconvenience to be managed." Denise put her face in her hands. I let the silence hold. The lawnmower down the street had stopped. The live oak moved in a small breath of wind. "I want to tell you what I have done," I said. "Not to make you feel worse than you already do, but because you came here today, and I believe you came honestly, and you deserve to know where things actually stand." She lifted her face. Her eyes were wet. She nodded. I told her about Vivian, about the living trust, recorded at the courthouse, the house fully protected, about Dot's power of attorney, about Dr. Patricia Osei and the neuropsychological evaluation, clean, comprehensive, legally documented, about the certified letter to Dr. Morrison's office, about the new account at Coastal Heritage Bank. And then I told her about Harold's letter. I took it from my pocket. I had been carrying it every day for 3 weeks, the way you carry something that has become part of how you move through the world. And I held it in both hands. "Your father came to see Vivian in 2018, I said. He took out a separate life insurance policy, $340,000, in an account that has nothing to do with this house, this trust, or any plan your husband made." Denise stared at me. "He knew," I said. "Not everything, but enough. He loved me carefully enough to build a wall I did not know I had, and he trusted me to find it when I needed it." The tears came then, not gradually but all at once, the way tears come when you have been holding them back long enough, and the thing holding them finally breaks. She pressed both hands flat on the arms of the chair and wept quietly, without trying to stop or explain it, and I sat beside her and let her. I did not say it's all right. It was not all right. Some things are not all right, and saying they are is a small dishonesty that accumulates over time into something large and destructive. But I reached over and put my hand on hers, and I left it there. The petition was withdrawn on a Wednesday morning, 11 days after it was filed. Vivian called me while I was in the garden deadheading Harold's roses. "Troy's attorney contacted my office this morning," she said. "They are withdrawing the petition, voluntarily before the court date." I placed down my gardening gloves. "Why?" Because I sent them our response filing Monday afternoon, the living trust documentation, the power of attorney, Dr. Osei's full evaluation, Reverend Calvin's witness statements, and a letter advising them that the recording of the original phone conversation, which you had the legal right to make in Georgia as a party to the call, had been preserved and would be submitted as evidence of bad faith if the petition proceeded. A pause. They did not know about the recording, Loretta. I know they did not. Troy's attorney called it a misunderstanding, said his client wanted to avoid unnecessary conflict. I am sure he did. The petition is gone. Your assets are fully protected. The living trust stands. And I have sent a separate letter to the Georgia State Medical Board regarding Dr. Morrison's conduct. A physician who agrees to provide documentation supporting a conservatorship petition without conducting an independent examination of the patient is in serious violation of professional standards. Dr. Morrison will be answering for that. She paused. How are you holding up? I stood in the garden with the phone in one hand and Harold's yellow rose in the other, the stubborn one that always bloomed late, but always bloomed. I am standing in my garden, I said. In my house. On a Wednesday morning, holding a rose my husband planted. I paused. I am holding up just fine. He rang the doorbell at 7:15 on a Thursday morning 3 days later, and I knew it was him before I reached the door because of the particular way he always knocked. 3 times, evenly spaced, the same pattern since he was a boy coming home from school. Reginald Washington stood on my porch with a paper bag from the bakery on the east side of town, the one I had been going to since before he was born, and a look on his face that contained several things at once: apology, relief, and the particular expression of a person who has been rehearsing what they want to say and is no longer entirely sure any of it is adequate. Amani called me, he said. Come in, I said. I will put the coffee on. He sat at the kitchen table in the chair he had always sat in as a boy, the one closest to the window, where the morning light came in strongest. I poured coffee and set out the pastries from the bag and sat across from him, and for a moment neither of us said anything, and the kitchen did what this kitchen has always done, which is hold the people in it without asking anything of them. Denise called me 2 months ago, he said finally. She wanted me to sign on to the petition. As a family member, it would have carried more weight. I wondered if she had tried. I said no. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. She said I didn't understand the situation. I said I understood it fine. She hung up. He looked at the table. And then I didn't call you. That's what I keep coming back to. I said no to her, and then I just, didn't call you. Reggie, I didn't know how, he said. After Dad died, I didn't know how to talk to you without him there. He was always the one who knew how to move through the hard things. I kept waiting until I figured it out, and the weeks kept going, and then it had been so long that calling felt like it needed some big explanation, and He stopped, pressed his lips together. I left you alone when you needed people, he said. I'm sorry, Mama. I looked at my son. This man with Harold's forehead and Harold's hands, sitting in the chair closest to the morning light where he had eaten 1,000 breakfasts as a boy, in this house where he had grown from a toddler helping plant a live oak into a person with a whole life I only knew pieces of. Have you eaten? I asked. He blinked, looked up. No, he said. Then eat, I said. We will talk while you eat. We have time. He looked at me for a long moment, really looked, the way people sometimes stop and look when they realize they have been seeing something without properly observing it, and then something in his face loosened, and he reached for a pastry, and we began. We talked for 3 hours, about Harold, things we had never said out loud because Harold's presence had always made it unnecessary, and his absence had made it temporarily impossible, about the distance that had grown between us, not from anger or intention, but from the simple human failure to reach across it often enough, about Memphis, where Reggie had been living for 4 years, building a life he was cautiously proud of, about Denise. Is she going to be okay? He asked. I thought about her face on the porch that Sunday, the tears she had not tried to stop. I think she is going to have to decide that for herself, I said. But I think she is capable of it. She always was. She just got turned around somewhere. Troy? They are having difficulties. I chose my words carefully. Denise is seeing a counselor. Alone for now. I think she is starting to understand some things about herself that she had been avoiding. Reggie nodded slowly. Dad always said Troy saw everything as a transaction. Your father was perceptive. He was. Reggie was quiet a moment. Mama, can I come home for a while? Not forever. I have some leave saved up. I would like to be here. I looked at him across the kitchen table, in the house his father and I had built one tired board at a time, in the chair where he had eaten cereal and done homework, and grown up right in front of us so gradually that the growing was invisible until suddenly it was not. And now he was a man with Harold's hands asking to come home. Your room is exactly the same, I said. I never changed it. He smiled. Harold's smile, sudden and completely genuine. I know, he said. I always knew. 6 weeks after the petition was withdrawn, I sat at the kitchen table with Vivian Holt, Dot Simmons, Reggie, and Imani, who had taken the bus down from Atlanta by herself for the first time, a fact she reported with the calm confidence of someone who considers independent travel a perfectly reasonable milestone, which I agree it is. Denise was not there. She was in Atlanta, in the early stages of what appeared to be a genuine reckoning with herself, and I had learned over 64 years that a reckoning requires privacy to be real. We were talking more now, carefully, the way you talk when the ground has shifted and you are both still finding your footing. Things were not repaired, but they were, cautiously, beginning. Reverend Calvin sat in the corner armchair, present in the easy, undemanding way of a man who has learned that sometimes the most useful thing you can offer is simply your company. Vivian spread the new documents across the table, and I walked everyone through what I had decided. The house and its half-acre lot would be transferred into an educational trust, the Harold and Loretta Washington Community Trust, with a clear purpose and a clear timeline. While I lived, the house remained my home, entirely. I would continue to live in it, maintain it, grow roses in the back garden, teach piano on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, sit on the porch and watch the live oak grow taller than it already was. Nothing about my daily life would change. After I was gone, the house would not be sold. It would not be divided among heirs. It would become the Washington House Community Arts Center, serving the children of the Victorian District and the surrounding neighborhoods the way this house had been informally serving them for 30 years already. Free music lessons, after-school programs, a place where children could come and be seen. The piano in the front room would stay exactly where it was. The funding to establish and operate it would come from Harold's insurance policy, his last act of protection, finally put to its fullest purpose. The table was quiet when I finished. Dot was cleaning her glasses with the hem of her blouse, the thing she always did when she was trying not to cry, a habit of 30 years that fooled absolutely nobody. Reggie was looking at the table, jaw tight, eyes bright. Vivian had the expression of a lawyer who has spent a career arranging complicated things and has just witnessed something arranged simply, which in her experience is the rarest and most satisfying outcome. And Imani was looking at me with her grandfather's eyes, wide open, completely present, not trying to be anything other than exactly what she was. "Grandma," she said, "the piano stays?" "The piano stays," I said. "Forever?" "That is what forever means, sweetheart." She looked at the piano across the room. The upright Steinway that had been in this house since 1993, played by hundreds of children's hands over 3 decades. The bench where she and I had sat together when she was 7 years old, and her small hands were finding the keys for the first time. Then she slid off her chair, crossed the room, and sat down at the bench. She put her hands on the keys. What she played was the Coltrane arrangement, the one she had played for me over the phone that evening, badly and joyfully, the notes that had made something open in my chest like a window. She played it better now, not perfectly, but with intention, with feeling, with the particular quality that separates a student who is practicing from a musician who is beginning to understand what music is actually for. Reverend Calvin bowed his head. Nobody spoke. We just listened. I still wake before the mockingbirds. Some things do not change, and I have made my peace with the ones that do not, which frees up a great deal of energy for the ones that do. Reggie stayed for 6 weeks and then returned to Memphis, but he calls every Sunday now, every single Sunday without exception, the way Harold used to call his own mother every Sunday until she passed. The pattern of consistent love looks small until you measure how much of a life it builds. Reggie has mentioned more than once that there is a construction project coming to the Savannah area, and he is looking into a transfer. I have not said anything about this. I know better than to hope too loudly at something still taking shape, but I have made sure his room still has the good lamp, the one he likes to read by. Imani comes for a full week every summer and every winter break. She is learning Chopin now, with the focus of a young person who has found the thing that belongs to her. Her mother drives her down and stays the first night, sleeping in the guest room, and we sit on the porch after Imani goes to bed and talk the way Denise and I used to talk before something came between us and made direct conversation difficult. The something is less between us now, not gone. There are things that do not fully heal, only scar over, and a scar is not the same as being whole. But a scar is the body's own work, built from what you have, and tougher than what was there before. Denise made her decision about Troy herself, in her own time, without asking for my input, and without framing it as anything other than what it was, a correction to a path that had gone wrong. I respected that. I told her so. She told me one evening on the phone that going through the financial papers after the separation, the accounts, the projections, the plans Troy had laid out with such careful detail, she had finally understood the full shape of what had almost happened. She said she sat on the floor of her home office and did not move for a long time. I kept thinking about Daddy's hammer, she said. In that photograph. He was so proud. He was, I said. I almost sold that, she said. I almost sold the place where that photograph was taken. But you did not, I said. And you are the one who came down alone and sat on the porch and told me the truth. Even before you knew everything, you did that. It matters, Denise. She was quiet for a long moment. Mama, how did you stay so calm through all of it? I thought about that question honestly before I answered. I had your father's letter in my pocket, I said. I knew I was not alone even though he was gone. That is what he gave me. Not just the money, not just the legal protection. He gave me the knowledge that someone had thought ahead for me, had seen me clearly enough to know what I would need before I needed it. That is a very steadying thing to carry. I want to be that kind of person, she said quietly. The kind who thinks ahead for the people they love. Then start, I said. It is not too late. It is never as late as we think. Marcus Jr. moved on to the middle school band last fall. I like to think I gave him a decent foundation. In his place, I now have a brother and sister, 8 and 10 years old, the boy careful and precise, the girl quick and instinctive and possessed of more natural ear than she knows yet. They come every Thursday. They remind me of Denise and Reggie at those ages, and I find that enormously pleasing. The Washington House Community Trust received its nonprofit status on a Tuesday morning in early winter. Vivian called me with the news while I was at the kitchen table with my blue notebook. It is official, she said. Harold and Loretta Washington Community Trust, operating as Washington House Community Arts Center. I looked around the kitchen, at the cast iron skillet on the stove, at Harold's photograph on the windowsill, at the doorway to the front room where the piano waited. What would Harold say? Vivian asked. I smiled. He would say he was glad the paperwork was finally in order. She laughed, a genuine laugh, the kind that comes from real amusement. You are probably right. And then he would go find something to fix, I said, because that was Harold. The celebration was always about 30 seconds long, and then he would see something that needed doing. I still write in my blue notebook every morning. 3 things. It takes less than 5 minutes, and it has kept me on the right side of the darkness more times than I can count. This morning I wrote, the roof over my head, still mine, and after me, everyone's. Harold's foresight, which reaches into a future he never saw. Imani's hands on the piano keys. I closed the notebook, finished my coffee, put on my jacket and walked out to the front porch to watch the live oak in the early morning light. Harold planted that tree in 1991 with 2-year-old Reggie toddling around his feet, getting into the dirt, being more hindrance than help. He placed the young tree into the ground with the same care he gave everything, not because he would see it grow to its full height. He did not know if he would, but because someone would. Because the tree did not need him to be there to keep growing. It just needed to be properly planted. Roots don't fear the wind, he used to say. I used to hear that as comfort. Now I understand it differently. It is not comfort. It is instruction. The root is not passive. The root is not simply enduring. The root is choosing every day to grow downward into the dark, unseen work that makes everything above the ground possible. The root does not fear the wind because the root has already done the necessary thing. So had I. The mockingbirds started up in the sycamore. The street began its slow morning business. someone walking a dog, the smell of someone else's breakfast drifting from an open window, the ordinary, beautiful noise of a neighborhood continuing itself. The live oak threw its wide, calm shadow across the front yard. I sat in my chair on the porch of my house. The house that was mine, and after me would belong to all of them, which is another way of saying it would belong to Harold. The way things you build with love always belong to the person you built them for. Good morning, baby, I thought. The oak moved in the early breeze, a long, slow wave, like a hand raised in greeting. We are still here.